Howdy, this is Daniel Dolphin, and welcome to episode 4 of Adult Onset Horsemanship. Today we're going to have more of a Q&A type episode, and I'm going to go through my inbox and look at some of the questions that I've gotten recently that I think are pretty interesting and worthy of discussion. We're going to dive into those today. This past week I had a young man contact me, and he was interested in some of the transition bit stuff, and particularly was curious about chain mouths and gag bits. And this is not a subject I've ever done a video on. We don't really get into them in our comprehensive video more than a bit of information, because I really consider them kind of to be niche bits, and we're looking more at the mainstream stuff. But let's talk about them a little bit. A chain mouth, let's say we've got one with a port in it, just for simplicity's sake. The port in that bit is going to give the horse tongue relief. For those of you that don't know or haven't yet gotten the video more than a bit of information, the main nerve in the tongue is called the lingual nerve, and it runs right down the center line seam of the tongue, and then it has smaller nerve endings that branch off sort of like a tree. And whenever we're trying to give a horse tongue relief, we're predominantly making room for the lingual nerve and trying not to put pressure on the main branch of that nerve, because that would be the most sensitive portion of the tongue. So if we have a port and a chain mouth, that's what we're accomplishing. We've basically given the lingual nerve a break. Chain mouths are generally described as being pretty mild, and let's break that down a little bit. Now, I will say there are a variety of different types of chain used, and that would certainly be important in looking at the bit and determining just how severe it is. But that being said, all chain mouths are going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of twisted wire. They can have the potential for an abrasive effect. So that's not the kind of bit I would want to use one rein at a time to bend a horse around, because you will have portions of the tongue that can go into the vacant spots of the chain, and as you would pull sideways, you can have an abrasive effect on the tongue, which is certainly not going to be to your benefit. But they also can have a pretty pinching effect. So anytime we have a bit that is more of a tongue pressure bit, tongue pressure and bar pressure are inversely proportional, meaning a bit with more tongue pressure will have less bar pressure. Because of the way chain mouths will wrap the tongue and spread out over the surface area of the tongue, where a fixed bit can't, it's a solid bit would more dig down into the tongue. They are a little more tongue pressure, and particularly on the outsides if we have one that has tongue relief. So what they're going to tend to do is really pinch the tongue between the chain and the bars. Or most likely, if you do that, what you're going to actually have is a tongue withdrawal. So I'm not a big fan of chain mouths. I definitely think, like most other bits, if you really do have a very good soft set of hands, then you probably can get along with a chain mouth without a whole lot of problem. I would definitely put it in the category of 80% of the time I see someone ride with one, the horse is showing me body language that I don't like. So I don't really see where we've really helped ourselves in that instance with a chain mouth, and particularly with some of the types of chain that are in there that are really more on the abrasive side. So not a big fan. Again, if you have really nice hands, then it's probably not a big deal. But if you have really nice hands, then you probably could get along with just about anything anyway. So I would put a chain mouth down, like there'd be 45 other bits that I would own before I would be looking for something like that that's going to fit the 1 in 1,000 horses that prefers it. It's going to be definitely in a niche category to my mind. Gag bits. Gag bits are really, and I'll say here I'm talking about gag bits with leverage. I guess we'll do sliding gags at the end. So gag bits with leverage, again, I'm not a fan. I would definitely say this is one of the more overused bits out there right now. I don't mind the gag bits that are kind of limited, where they have sort of like an Argentine cheek, and the mouthpiece can slide up the cheek of the bit an inch, 3/4 of an inch or something, but it's limiting. Anytime we have a gag bit that has leverage on it, two things are going to occur. The first is the gag action. So as you pull back on that bit, it is going to rise up into the lips and corners of the mouth and go toward the horse's ears, or more urgently toward the molars. And it's also going to put pull pressure on a horse. Now, pull pressure, of the 7 pressure points that we use to communicate with any horse through the bridle, pull pressure is far and away the least sensitive. In other words, like if we took a bridle that had a 1-inch band going over the horse's poll, and we had another headstall that had a 1/2-inch band going over the horse's poll, and you rode with the two, you would practically see absolutely no difference in the way that the horse rode, even though you have halved the surface area. You've made it twice as severe. Now, if you do something like that with a curb chain or the diameter of the mouthpiece of the bit, you have or double surface area, you're going to see a significant change in the way the horse responds to it. They're going to be way more sensitive. So pull pressure, by and large, is one of the least sensitive areas, the least effective areas for us to try to control a horse through pressure. The other portion of this, as we are going further up into the horse's mouth, it's very easy with these bits to start pressing the lip and corner of the mouth tissue into the premolars, or particularly if you don't have a bit seat in there. So it's the kind of bit that can go from pressure to pain very, very quickly. And anytime we cause pain in the horse's mouth, the best case scenario is that we just distracted him, and the worst case scenario is that we've really got a fight on our hands now. Pain tends to be a demotivator, not a motivator. So in other words, what a pain response will generally do in a horse is it will stop them from doing something. Think of an electric fence. You do not pee on an electric fence 3 times in a row. Once is enough, twice if you're stupid, but nobody does that a 3rd time. Okay? It doesn't get you to do something, it gets you to stop doing something. So pain in the horse's mouth, by and large, is just not an effective way to go training-wise. And again, at best, it's going to be a distraction. It's going to stop them from conscious thought and bring their mind onto pain. The other portion that makes gag bits very difficult to ride with, and particularly the ones that have a longer slide to them, is that from a physics and a mechanics standpoint, this is one of the few situations where it's going to be almost impossible for you to gauge what the horse is feeling in their mouth. What I mean by that, let's take a typical Western type curb bit. Don't really care what kind of mouth you have in it, but let's just say for easy math's sake that it has a 3-to-1 leverage ratio. And so I can consciously know that, and I can figure that I'm putting about 5 pounds on the reins, and so I know that the horse is feeling about 15 in their mouth. What happens mechanically with a gag bit, let's say that I put that same 5 pounds of pressure on the reins, and let's say that throughout the entire maneuver or range of motion of the horse's head or whatever is going on, that I maintain a perfect 5 pounds of pressure on the reins. When I initially start that, the horse will feel 15. As the mouthpiece slides and it starts to go up the cheek of the bit, that mechanical advantage is constantly changing. What the horse is feeling in their mouth is constantly changing, but what I'm feeling in my hand isn't changing at all. So maybe initially I put 5 pounds of pressure on the reins. I'm used to a horse feeling 15. The horse initially feels 15, but then as the bit is sliding up the cheek, he goes from feeling 15 to 20, then from 20 to 25, maybe 25 to 30. Meanwhile, nothing changed in my hand at all. And that is actually mechanically how gag bits work. They have far more of a mechanical advantage than a typical bit does. They are mega amplifiers, but they're only amplifiers on the horse's end. And that's why I'm not a fan of it. If I put a bridle on a horse and I tell you, hey, be careful because this is a really severe bit and it's really got a lot of leverage, you're probably going to change the way that you're riding a little bit. If I put a gag bit in a horse's mouth, most people have no concept that that's what we've really just done. We just took the mechanical advantage and we increased it exponentially. So that's what gag bits really do. And again, we're putting that pressure mostly into the lips and corners of the mouth and then down on the pole, and to some degree the bars and the tongue, depending on the mouthpiece and all of that stuff. So gag bits, I would say, are pretty difficult to ride with. They take a very experienced rider to ride well with them. Most of the time when you put a horse in a gag bit, what you're really going to do is numb the crap out of him, because he's going to become so used to way more pressure that if you put back the old bit, then he won't respond to minor pressure anymore, because he's so used to things escalating so quickly. So that is mechanically how gag bits work and function. Now, sliding gag bits, a little bit different. There isn't the mechanical advantage effect. People tend to think that it works like a pulley, where you have to have two pulleys in order to get the mechanical advantage, where it doubles the load that you put in it. That's not said very well, but you don't really have a mechanical advantage with a snaffle type of sliding gag. What you do still have is the bit going up into the lips and corners of the mouth, again, which they're the second most sensitive tissues, but they're difficult tissues to escalate pressure into. Where the tongue will pick up on that very quickly, the lips and corners don't so much. It's just more and more pressure. It doesn't get to a pain or a warning sort of a situation in that tissue. And then you take it to a degree where all of a sudden you press his cheeks into his premolars and you go straight to pain. Once again, not a type of bit that I am a fan of. Most of the time, people think of these bits for horses that get a little too low-headed or a little too tucked in, and they're trying to pick them up. And if you really think about what's going on, I don't find that they have that effect so much. I tend to find that the horses that people want to ride gag bits on need more leg aids on them. That's really the picking up shoulders and those sorts of things. That should be done with your legs. And so if I'm going to ride one of the horses with those types of problems, I'm going to do lots of circles, lots of counter arcing, lots of lifting shoulders, and I can generally fix all of that with just a snaffle. Understand this is a whole lot of talking, a whole lot of just take my word for it. If I had my trusty whiteboard, it would be a lot easier to explain and probably get across to you, but that's sort of what I think about chain mouths and gag bits. Not really a fan. Can certainly get those same perceived actions done with simpler bits, and I'd always rather be simpler rather than more complicated. And once again, if you really do look at the physics of shanked gag bits, they are far more severe than most people realize. Far more severe. So the next topic that we're going to discuss is the leadership approach. This comes from Claire Dupuy, who will be our guest in the next podcast. And she talks about the leadership approach being questioned nowadays. A lot of people are starting to feel that it is overrated, and that, well, the way that it gets talked about a lot is more of a bossy sort of effect. I think this is one of those things where connotation versus denotation comes into play. People hear a certain word and they have, based upon their own particular experiences and feelings and baggage, they have an emotional response to that word. Leadership is one of those words. You could view that in a positive sort of a way or a negative sort of a way, depending on your own particular experiences and feelings. So this is how I view it. Pecking order or hierarchies, or however you want to say it, are absolutely inescapable. They exist from oceanic invertebrates all the way up to the higher order mammals and everything in between. It's not a controversial thing to say that in any way, shape, or form. One of the other topics that is now sort of the more present and being discussed and thought about and trendy sort of a notion is the neurochemistry within horses. Well, among that neurochemistry, some of the most important proteins, hormones, neurotransmitters that we are thinking about are serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin. Serotonin, a bit oversimplified, but it's the way I'm going to say it. Serotonin is the neurotransmitter of hierarchies. People and animals with more serotonin are higher up in the pecking order or the hierarchy or the social structure of their particular species. Animals with lower serotonin levels are lower down in there. And that has peripheral consequences. So like a lot of antidepressants that we put people on work through the serotonin system to get rid of their depression or their anxiety and those sorts of things. Once again, this is a very simplified version. I say all that to say this. Leadership and hierarchy structures within animals are utterly inescapable. I think I see more of a challenge to that through the positive reinforcement purists, and I wholeheartedly disagree with the sentiment. Now, back to the connotation and denotation. I do think you have to be a leader. I do think that any animal that you're trying to train must have respect for you within their own social structure. I do think they have to view you as a leader, or the connection between you and the animal will be skewed, very commonly to a degree that will be dangerous for you. This is one of the things that I do see a lot in the positive reinforcement community. And at least my introduction to that with horses was when I was in college. There was a guy that I had organic chemistry with who wanted to be a dolphin trainer at SeaWorld. That's what this guy aspired to. And he sent me a video clip. There was a lady who was, I think, a former SeaWorld trainer. And I'm not getting in any blackfish territory here, nothing like that. I haven't seen that documentary, but I have plenty of feelings on animal rights people who tend to make documentaries and the disingenuous nature of that. So take that as you will. But anyway, this lady and her husband were being featured on a news story. I don't know what her name was. I don't know if she's still around. She may be the guru that started all of this. She may be dead from this mare. But she and her husband were featured on a news story. They had done a bunch of groundwork with the horse. They had their little pouches with apple treats or whatever. They had taught the horse to retrieve. It would go over jumps. It would go back and forth between the two. They had basically trained it to be a well-mannered dog. Now, I watched this video, and the thing that stuck out to me the whole time that I absolutely couldn't get past was this mare's expression. The mare had absolutely contempt shown all over her face, her ears, for the two people. She didn't respect them at all. Even throughout the little video clip that the news story had done, the horse throws a kick at the lady's husband. She was definitely looking at them as a treat machine, as a vendor. Now, that's not how positive reinforcement has to go. This was poorly done positive reinforcement, and I suspect that this lady did understand training theory very well and understood what positive reinforcement was, hence her background at SeaWorld, but she did not understand horses, hierarchies, or body language very well, because she was absolutely, in my opinion, in imminent danger. She and her husband both, the entire time they were around this horse. This horse was definitely giving off billboard size vibes that I am literally going to attack you at any moment. So, again, I don't know if the lady's still around or not. Maybe the horse killed him right there and she learned the lesson the hard way. What I know from my experience is that dominant hierarchies to horses are literally life and death. If we think about the wild horse herd, we've got a herd of desert mustangs. Let's say there's 20 of them and there's a water hole that's drying up. Well, each day they go to that water hole, and the alpha may not get there first, but as soon as the alpha gets there, it walks up and it drinks its fill. And it's going to move horses out of its way. It's going to threaten. It's going to do whatever it needs to do. It's going to get there and get its fill. The horse with the least rights to the water is going to be number 20 in that pecking order, the most submissive, least dominant horse. If there's only enough water today for 19 horses to drink, and that goes on for a couple of weeks, that 20th horse dies. Now, that's not a pleasant thing to think about, and it's not a pleasant thing for us to discuss here, but it is reality. And all horses have that mentality, whether you recognize it or not. If you don't recognize it, then likely you're anthropomorphizing to a degree that's getting in your way. Not all people read horses for a living. All horses read people for a living. All horses understand that pecking order is life and death to them. Even the ones that have lived their whole life in bubble wrap. And in fact, some of the most difficult horses to train are the ones that weren't raised in a herd environment. We get that orphan foal. We get the pet that's been in the family's backyard and treated like a dog for 2 years. I will take the wild Mustang over the orphaned foal or the spoiled backyard pet every single time, because those horses didn't get introduced to herd dynamics and their social structure is skewed, often to a degree that is irreparable. So, this is the way that I look at it. You absolutely have to be your horse's leader. That does not mean you have to be an asshole. There's a difference. My 92-year-old grandmother, thank the Lord, is still with us. She is the apple of my eye, maybe my favorite person in the entire world. Anything Mama wants, Mama gets. I would drop what I'm doing in a heartbeat and run to her anytime she would need me. She is absolutely dominant to me, but I could pick her up and crush her, right? I mean, it's not that there's a physical threat or anything like that. It is respect. It is esteem. It is something she has earned. It is something she cannot lose in my eyes. That's a hierarchy. It exists for a reason. It exists in people. It exists in animals. There's no training method you're ever going to come up with that erases that. The way that I think about it is that if we take 10 horses and we put them in an arena and we observe them and they're safe, and we go put, let's say they're horses that aren't used to one another, we go put a bucket of feed in that arena and we walk away and we come back tomorrow, those horses will not have the same amount of hair on them that they had when we dropped them off. They're going to establish a hierarchy, a pecking order. They're going to do that through body language threats and violence backing that up. They're going to kick, they're going to bite, they're going to push, they're going to shove, they're going to fight. They're going to establish a pecking order. If we go out there the next day, we may not know right away which horse wound up winning. If that horse won, there's probably not going to be any obvious fights breaking out anymore. Things will be settled at some point. The way we can tell easily is we watch for which horse can move the other horse's feet. That's the dominant horse. Now I ask you, if you are someone who sets dominance aside and you then try to work with horses, and in that horse's mind, deep down in his instincts and his innate conditioning, it knows that the dominant horse is the one that can move the other horse's feet, and you give up dominance, how do you move your horse's feet? You're going to have a long uphill battle. You're going to fight that for a long time. I consider this to be one of the basic horsemanship aspects, and there's probably 50 to 60% of the riding public is stuck at this point right now, and they do on a regular basis have respect or dominance issues with their horse. And oftentimes they feel bad about fixing it. That's one of the things that you just have to get over. You have to move your horse's feet. You have to get their respect. Otherwise, you're cannon fodder, and you are in danger. They will run over you. If the grizzly bear pops up, taking you out is a valid escape plan in their mind. If you're a dominant horse to them in their own mind, taking you out is not a viable option. They're going to find something else, find another horse to run over. I don't think it's inescapable. I think this is a pendulum shift of trends. It's going toward dominance is a bad thing. I mean, within our own social structure, right, there's lots of hierarchies being challenged right now in humankind. The pendulum will shift too far that way. There'll be a correction. It'll come back. Stay with the classics. They never go out of style. One of my dressage people has a question for today, and it involves contact and connection. She says, connection versus heavy contact. Some seem to interpret dressage as too much contact, but it's all about the feel and how much contact a horse needs at any given time to relay a message. We can have contact even on a long and stretchy circle and still not have sloppy reins. I agree with everything that she's asserting in there. Let me talk about a couple of things. One, what dressage is an evolving concept. If you do go back and you look at some of the dressage masters that we do fortunately have video of, the Nuno Oliveras, the people from the 60s and 70s where video was new but existed, you will see that dressage then looks very different what we see as dressage now, and they even have sort of the distinction at this point of classical dressage versus the more formal show type dressage. One of the foundational tenets of dressage is acceptance of the bit. Another is that at your upper levels of riding a horse, you have self-carriage. So let's discuss those two concepts. I go through great lengths to decode the body language of a horse with regard to bits. That's one of the parts I'm very proud of that we did in the More Than a Bit of Information video, and kind of showing you how the horse, through its body language, shows you acceptance or rejection of the bit. A couple of those signs are a white foamy mouth and a horse that is consistently opening their mouth or has stopped swallowing and so forth. So let's talk about that. I'm going to digress from the rein thing and come back to it at the end here. A white foamy mouth truly should be a huge red flag to any rider. A horse that has saliva outside of the mouth isn't using their tongue as they normally would. And you all know this to be true. If you walked out into the paddock to catch your horse today and they had a white foamy mouth, you would be calling the vet thinking that they've got a poison plant, some kind of toxicity issue, or something like that. It's abnormal. They should be using their tongue. They should be swallowing. They should be clearing saliva out just as you and I are. If you see a human walking along with saliva drool going down the chin, you're going to think they've had a stroke or something is wrong and abnormal in that state. Now, the thing is, when we get in there with a bit, if we get the horse's tongue aggravated, they start using their tongue defensively, which is to say abnormally. That means a couple of things. One, they tend to contract their tongue. Anytime a horse contracts their tongue, the portion of the tongue back between the molars looks very different than the tongue that we see in the front. The part we see in the front is kind of flat and pancakey. The portion in the back is rooted down at the lower jaw. It's much more up and down, it has a lot more depth, and it even has a hump that happens behind where the bit is. And whenever the horse withdraws or contracts their tongue, that hump becomes more pronounced. And if a horse is in a position like the vertical or behind the vertical, and they contract their tongue at all, we get into something called dorsal displacement of the soft palate. So the soft palate is in the back of the throat. It's what closes in your throat when you swallow, and that's what keeps food or saliva or drink or whatever from getting into your airway. The soft palate and the epiglottis come together, they form a seal in the back of the throat, and your airway and your esophagus are completely separated at that point. If someone has ever made you laugh in the middle of swallowing or whatever, you have chocolate milk come out of your nose, the whole typical elementary school thing, that's a failure of the seal of the soft palate and the epiglottis. If the horse is in a curled position and withdraws its tongue at all, the root of the tongue, the base of the tongue, is going to push on that seal and break it. So when people talk about the mouth seal, they typically think of the lips sealing, which is part of it, but the mouth seal is also occurring in the back of the throat. One of the things a lot of people don't understand is that a horse is what's called an obligate nose breather. They can only breathe through their nose. If you ever have a horse that seems to be panting or something like that, you're in a state of that soft palate epiglottis being broken, and as they exhale, it's going into the mouth chamber rather than out the nose like it is supposed to. So that's, again, an abnormal state. So we have a horse now, knowing that has drool outside of the mouth. That horse is not using its tongue correctly. It's not swallowing correctly. When a horse swallows, their tongue rocks the hyoid apparatus, which is a series of 7 bones that kind of cradle the tongue. Those bones are connected via ligaments to the pole, the cervical vertebra, and actually all the way down into the shoulders and the sternum. So each time a horse works his tongue and swallows, they sort of stretch all of those ligaments. We get the sort of things that we get from a stretch. A stretch feels good. It helps us to relax. It restores blood flow. Stretching is good. Prolonged contractions of things are not. That's when we get cramps. That's when things get unbalanced. That's when resistance and bracing starts to occur. So if we have a horse that's not using its tongue properly and isn't clearing saliva properly, we have a horse that is bracing against us, that is building up lactic acid, that is getting sore, that is getting tense. And it all begins with the tongue. The tongue is the very first muscle in the chain of the horse's body that we communicate to with the bit. And if you cause tension or defensive reactions in the tongue, I assure you that tension and that brace radiates throughout the entire horse's body. It's going to go into the pole, it's going to go into the neck, the withers, the back, all the way to the hindquarters. Now, the other portion of that is that we have white foamy mouths. So not only do we have saliva, we have air incorporated into saliva. Now, in the video, I do use some egg whites in this, and I use a whisk and I make a meringue. And I just want you to think of that visually. How much churning of the egg whites it takes to turn the egg whites, which are normally a clear liquid, into a white frothy foam. Now, that foam can be formed by the exhaling of the horse, but more likely it's formed by the bit in the corners of the mouth. This is one of the reasons why it's so important to drop a bit down a little bit where we're not causing wrinkles in the corner of the mouth, because if we're doing that, we have broken the mouth seal in addition to other things initially. Okay, so there's acceptance and rejection of the bit. White foam, big red flag. I could talk about that for hours, so I'm gonna stop myself right now because you're probably getting sick of listening to that. The other portion, the other tenet of dressage that we talked about was self-carriage. I don't really like what I hear offered as that definition most times, because they always use the word hold. And again, if you look at the old masters, and by old I mean 40, 50 years ago, Nuno Oliveira and his generation, there wasn't nearly as much rein contact at that time. And when I look at the body language of the horse, we had much freer moving ears. We did not have nearly as much white foam and so forth. We had a horse that looked far more natural. Almost all of their horses are 5, 10, 15 degrees in front of the vertical. Never do you see one behind the vertical in that age, at least I haven't. In other words, it's quite different from what we see today. Horses today tend to have a brace. You tend to see the tails working significantly. Tail blocking is now a fairly common thing. We do the nose bands that we have gotten into are sure enough medieval when we get into the flash, the figure eight, and that kind of stuff. We have ourselves gotten desensitized to the signs from the horse of rejection of the bit and of our methods. We are not bringing out the quote-unquote natural gaits of the horse. We are not bringing out self-carriage when we have to hold a horse in frame. The balance of the bit is what's supposed to hold a finished horse in frame. Her question was really about connection versus contact. To me, good contact and good connection is just holding the weight of the rein and taking the slack out of it. Again, in the video, we talk about something called the action chain. And the action chain begins with your seat. It's your signal to the horse, and it doesn't matter whether you have a snaffle bit, a curb bit, a double bridle, all of these things still play out. So let's say we have a seat change, we sit, we tilt our pelvis forward, whatever we want to do. For this example, let's say we're going to stop the horse. So we sit down in our saddle. If we don't get a response from that, we adjust our grip on the reins. Good dressage teachers often talk about just tightening your hands and so forth. And horses can definitely feel that signal even if it isn't directly transmitted through pressure through the reins. In other words, if you tighten your hands on a rein that is slack, the horse will still feel it. I talk about the example that I used to have a horse that I'd trained when I would sit in the saddle, even bridleless, I would squeeze the saddle horn, and I had him trained to cue his head and shake his head yes off of that. I really need to train another horse to do that now. But they can absolutely feel the tension in your body, the cue through your hand, just from you tightening your hand. Remember, they have a sense of feel about 6 times more sensitive than the human does. So we tighten our hands. We adjust our grip on the rein in some way, shape, or form. Now let's say we have really loose reins. We start to pick the reins up to make contact. If you have contact, you lose this step. It's already done, but they're going to feel reins moving on their neck. Now, let's say we had slack reins again. They're going to feel the rein loop, the rein chain, whatever. It's going to slide up the ring of the bit until the rein makes a straight line from the rider's hands to the ring of the bit. So if we're slack, that's not a straight line. As we pick it up, we make a straight line. As we take up tension on the reins, whatever connects to the reins moves. Subtle vibratory signal goes through the bit at that point. Once again, all curb bits are amplifiers. That vibratory signal is not only feelable in a horse's mouth, it's unmistakable. Okay, it's a very clear signal that something has happened. Now, whether we have a snaffle or a curb bit, we actually begin to put some pressure on the horse's mouth. We start to actually interact and compress the soft tissues, so the lips and the corners of the mouth. And with just about any bit, the lips and corners of the mouth are the very first tissues in the horse's mouth to receive any sort of signal from the bit. When we compress them a little bit, then we get to the tongue. And once we have fully compressed those soft tissues, now we get to potentially bar pressure, chin pressure, pole pressure, all of those sorts of things. And once again, all of that happens regardless whether we have a snaffle bit, a curb bit, whatever. That's all what signal is in a bit. Signal is basically everything that happens before everything comes tight and the soft tissues become fully compressed. Connection to a horse is when you have that very subtle line of communication with your hands, and a line of communication that goes both ways. The horse is feeling you and you are feeling the horse. When we have too heavy a contact, we lose a lot of the feel back from the horse, and the horse loses a lot of the feel from us. All of the subtlety, all of the nuance gets erased and replaced with white noise. Essentially, it's just a certain amount of pressure. We always have 5 pounds on the horse's mouth, and 5 pounds and less is to be ignored, and it's only when I apply 6 or 7 or 8 pounds that you're supposed to give me a response. So we have essentially a degree of pressure that we are asking for the horse to ignore. This is not a situation I ever want to set up. I would always want to be as light as possible with my horse, even a horse that I am riding in contact. That is most definitely a challenge. I consider contact to be a fairly high level of skill, and I think one of the worst disservices that we do to novice riders is have them attempt to ride in contact too early in their career before they have developed an independent seat, and we teach them to start balancing on their hands, and even worse, both they and their instructor are typically completely unaware that they are balancing on their hands and much heavier than they need to be on those reins. What I like to do for both the novice and the person that is used to this is have them walk the horse around and attempt to ride in the lightest contact possible. Again, thinking about the lip and corner of the mouth and any compression of that. So if I have a bit adjusted the way I want, there's no wrinkle in the corner. Now you have picked up one side of your bit and you have caused a wrinkle to occur. The horse fully feels you and can cue off of that. Anything above that is probably unnecessary unless we're in a sensitizing or disciplinary type of a situation. When a horse walks, trots, and to some degree canters, their head moves in 3 different directions all at once. Their chin moves in and out, their chin moves left and right, and their entire head moves up and down. And there is a consistent pattern to that. This is one of the things that we show in the video more than a bit of information. If you are riding in good contact, then you should be able to walk and trot your horse, hold the slack out of the reins, and your hands should not be parallel well, let's say in terms of across the horse, left foot to right foot, your hands shouldn't be riding together right there, because the horse's mouth isn't. His nose is tipping subtly left and right constantly, and so your right hand should be going forward as your left hand's coming back a little, and then vice versa. It's almost like the Nordic track thing where you're skiing in your hand to a very subtle degree. It's just a couple inches, but your hands should be moving that way if you are actually following the horse's mouth. What we see very commonly is older show horses that have been ridden, maybe they've been lunged in bidding rids a lot, or they've been ridden by people that don't have this good connection with their hands, and we wind up with the lower portion of the horse's jaw immobilized. I kind of liken this to, in fact, I picked on the lady that asked this question a little bit in a clinic, but the horse's chin becomes like a chicken's head. And if you aren't a country person, you don't know this. You can pick up a chicken, holding it by its body, and you can move the horse's body around in a little circle up and down and left and right 3 or 4 inches, and the head of the chicken will stay perfectly still. It's a very weird thing to watch, but they will absolutely do that. And these horses that have been ridden this way with too much contact over time, they learn to start immobilizing their jaw, and they're no longer moving naturally. They're no longer going left and right, in and out, up and down. Now they have frozen their head. Guarantee you, if you do this, a couple of things are going to become evident. As you start to turn, they're going to start doing what I call motorcycling. So in other words, if you ask a horse to, let's say he's on a circle to the right, and you change to a circle to the left, what you will notice is that the chin does not move, but the poll will be leaning to the right when the horse is going to the right, and the poll will jump over 6 inches and be leaning to the left as they go to the left. And with the poll goes the withers, with the withers goes the shoulders. We will definitely have a horse that is shouldering into and falling into a turn, at least to a minimal degree, if they get here. And again, one of our tenets is for a horse to move natural. The natural gaits. We're developing the natural gaits. We're developing self-carriage, but we've gotten to a point where self-carriage now requires being held, and natural gaits now requires moving in a way that horses never, ever, ever move in naturally. So I don't know if I've answered the question fully right there, but good contact will allow much better connection. I would say that the heavier your contact is, the less empathetic you can be, the poorer your connection will be. It's like trying to talk on a phone at a concert. A lot of white noise in the background. We got to yell now, and we can't hear each other nearly as well. Now it's time for the sponsor of this episode, and we've got a brand new sponsor on board for this one. Very proud to have them in. And our sponsor today is the Greener Pastures Crematorium, now taking horses, and Greener Pastures Taxidermy Studio, also now taking horses. They occupy the same building to better serve your needs. Have your friend in your living room, either way, forever. Once again, that's Greener Pastures Crematorium and Greener Pastures Taxidermy Studio, occupying the same building to better serve your needs. This next topic is going to be on cold-backed horses, and I don't really have a particular question formulated. I've worked with a couple of different people in the last 10 days that had this problem. One I just talked with this afternoon. Both of these cases are horses that you could be around just fine. You can saddle them. There's no issues. You lead them to wherever you're going. You put your foot in the stirrup. You get up in the saddle, and boom, they just break in half, seemingly with no warning. And this is one of those behaviors that we get in the problem horse camp from time to time. It's a fairly common one, to be honest. And I thought we would just talk about that a little bit and how I tend to address it. So first of all, I would always want to watch this occur and kind of handle this horse directly. There aren't many horses that do things without warning. Particularly for bucking, there is sort of a certain arc of the neck, high head position, and ears at a certain angle that is pretty much a dead giveaway that a horse is about to blow up. And I think anybody that started a lot of colts or ridden a lot of bucking horses will know just what I mean there. If you haven't had that experience, then consider yourself lucky, because it's not a great feeling when you're as old as I am to get in the saddle and then recognize that body posture. So if we're seeing a body posture like that, this is a horse that is probably in the, you think of fight or flight, and the third part of that is freeze. This is generally a horse that goes into freeze, and when they come out of freeze is usually when they go into fight or flight, and that's when the bucking thing happens. So you can step off of them, you can move them around. That's what I would prefer to do if I can get away with it. Sometimes you don't have the time to step off of them before everything goes south. But let's talk about a few other things we might look for before we get to that point. One of the obvious ones would be pain. And probably the most common thing that I see people do incorrectly when saddling a horse is to have the saddle too far forward on the horse. And there are different riggings to saddles, like particularly roping saddles tend to have what's known as a 3/4 rigging, which puts the front portion of the saddle, the bars and the saddle horn and the pommel and everything, it puts it in a more forward position, because we're going to be roping and pulling off of this saddle, and that saddle is expected to shift back. The problem with that is that when we're riding around with the pommel and the bars in the front part of the saddle, it's often sitting on the back part of the horse's scapula or shoulder blade, and definitely can cause some pain there. Another thing would just be an ill-fitting saddle, which is again a fairly reasonably common thing. I definitely have seen good-minded, easygoing horses. I had a colt a couple years ago that I rode for 30 days and sent home to the lady. When the lady came here to see the colt, she brought her saddle. She brought two. We put them on there, and one of the saddles, the one that fit her best, it was her saddle, just really didn't fit this colt. And I told her that, and I advised her not to ride the colt in that saddle, and I believe she went home and from what I understand, within a few rides, the colt that had never bucked with me once had bucked her off. And that's what pain will do. Pain in a horse's back is not going to be your friend. Another thing that we can see there could be a horse that is ulcerish or has a leaky hindgut, those sorts of issues. There is a video, I think I shared it not too long ago in the Bits, Spurs, and Good Sense page. If you look on YouTube and you look up Dr. Mark DePaulo, DePaolo, I believe, and ulcers, you'll find this video. And he goes over the acupressure points, the bladder meridian, that indicate horses with ulcer pains. The first two are on the sternum and right behind the elbows, so essentially where the girth of the saddle tightens up on the horse. A horse that's progressively a little more painful than that will then show pain right behind the shoulder blades up on the horse's back, in other words, where the bars of the saddle sit. And then the most painful horses have pressure points that are activated more in the loin kidney area of the horse, where the rear of the saddle. So basically, if a horse has ulcers or painful hindgut issues, a saddle and a girth activates every single pressure point that causes that pain. So it's definitely a possibility, if we have a horse having these sorts of reactions, that pain can be a portion of it. And behaviorally speaking, we're not going to train that out of one. If they're in pain, they kind of have every right to express that. You or I, it's like putting a rock in someone's boot and telling them to walk without limping, right? You have a right to limp. You are hurting. The horse is going to react the way they're going to react to pain. So we always need to go through that avenue. One little tip I'll give you, I don't feel like this is crossing a line, but I have had pretty good success with this. The test for ulcers is more expensive than the treatment for ulcers, which is still not cheap. And so here is my little quick country boy thing. If I have a horse that I am suspicious of ulcer problems, I will very often try to lower their grain intake, so lower the sugar content. I'll still keep them on hay, but I tend to try to put them on alfalfa. Alfalfa is a more alkaline type of a hay, and so it'll help to buffer stomach acid and so forth in the hindgut. Also, I'll put a little bit, like tablespoon, half a handful kind of amount of baking soda in their feed. I do this for about a week. Between the baking soda and the alfalfa, I'm not going to say it is a cure for ulcers or hindgut issues in a horse, but it will help with the pain. It'll mask it. It's going to help those ulcers start to feel a little bit better. And so if I do that for a week and I see a pretty significant change in my horse, that to me is a cheap and easy test that tells me there's a good chance I am dealing with ulcers and I need to treat ulcers. So once again, I'm not saying that is a treatment. It's just a cheap test where we don't have to scope an entire horse and go through that expense. If your veterinarian disagrees with that, by all means, follow your veterinarian. I'm not a veterinarian at all. I cannot diagnose or treat or recommend treatment for a horse. This is just one of those things that I've done myself and had decent success with, and I really don't think there's a downside or a harmful aspect to it. So take it as you will. Now let's look into the behavioral side. What we likely have here is a horse with an anticipatory response, what you could call a conditioned response if you wanted to get technical. And that could be a few different ways. So one of the horses that I was discussing, had the problem with and was discussing with the trainer, does this every single time without fail, or was. I think she's since kind of fixed it. But the other guy called me today, and the horse has done it about once a year for the last 3 years, including earlier today. Horses are great anticipators. And if what they anticipate occurring isn't something they can accept, then they're going to likely go into the limbic system and we're going to have fight or flight or something like that activated. It's important to note that that's not a conscious decision on the horse's part. Okay, that's instinct. And you have similar responses. It's like asking you not to flinch and then swinging a baseball bat at your head. You're going to flinch even if you consciously try not to. Some horses are going to buck in certain situations. Doesn't mean they're a bad horse. It just means that's what their wired reaction is. And this is really kind of related like to PTSD. So we might have a veteran that seems perfectly normal. Nobody has any idea that he or she is dealing with these issues, and then all of a sudden we're walking down the street and a car backfires or some fireworks go off or something, and next thing you know they're back in a war zone watching one of their buddies die. And that's a trigger. And that could be the same thing with these horses being mounted. With the horse that was being mounted that only does this once a year, the other 2 times he did that, something did in fact happen that we could all, one of the times the dog ran up and bit the horse just as the guy was getting on. Well, again, that's a flinch reaction, right? I mean, you don't train a horse to not buck when a dog bites him, right? That's a understandable reaction that the horse can have. So the way that a horse's mind works, the way the human mind works too, is there could be some little thing that comes up that takes us back, just like the fireworks might do for the veteran, or like the smell of banana nut bread might take you back to your grandma's kitchen when you were 5 years old or something. We have those sort of sensory memories that just drag us back, and those things are very, very powerful. So if I'm suspicious that something like that has occurred with my horse, and you don't have a lot of time to make that decision before the reaction occurs, you need to do something pretty big to kind of wake them up and get them out of there. If you think about the old movie where someone panics or they freeze and they need to move and react, and then the wife turns around and slaps the husband and says, "Wake up, you have to do this now," or throws the cold water right in their face, right? You have to do something that is enough that kind of shocks the system and brings them out of that unconscious limbic system back into the here and now and the conscious mind. So if I have a horse that is giving me these sorts of reactions that are kind of dangerous and are maybe not real predictable, I need to be really on my toes, minding my P's and Q's. And if I see that we're in that territory, I need to have a game plan. I need to react pretty quickly, pretty immediately. I might step right off of that horse, pull him around in a circle, and really start doing some pretty aggressive groundwork that definitely brings that horse's attention back to me, back to the here and now, getting them a little soft right now. And it might have seemed extreme and really out of place to somebody watching, but I pulled that horse back from the brink of fight or flight in that instance, which you absolutely can do. That's the true essence of desensitizing, is making them less likely to go to the extremes down that road and making it much easier for you to stop them where they don't automatically run to the dead end of that road every single time something happens. So there are a few thoughts, a few things to look at with regard to cold back horses. I can see we've gone almost an hour, so I think I'm going to wrap this Q&A up right here rather than torture y'all with another 20-minute question. But I think we're going to probably do one of these Q&As about once a month. So feel free to email me or Facebook message me or Instagram DM me or whatever if you have a question that you'd like addressed on one of these podcasts, and we'll try to get an answer for you. So this has been Daniel Dolphin and episode 4 of Adult Onset Horsemanship. If you have the ability within whatever app you're listening to this on to review it or 5-star it or whatever, please do so. Help us out. Share it with a friend. Tell somebody about it. And like I said, feel free to send us a question, a comment. You like it, you don't like it, whatever. All right. Well, hope that helps. Y'all have a good one. Take care. Happy Halloween.